So today's presentation is Ownership of Learning, Tech Tools, Reframing the Instructional Design to Enhance Learning. Before we start, here's our hashtag for today, SEV Tech 2016. At the end of the presentation will be links to this presentation, a contact question form, and an evaluation form. Takeaways. Tech that is efficient and easy to use. That's what we want. We don't want to have cumbersome technology. We want to increase student ownership of learning. We want to be aware of pedagogy shifts. We want to implement one new technology, one strategy to support student ownership. Just take away one thing. Don't try to implement everything. And lastly, you can own your own learning. So think about this today. As I'm going through the whole thing, what does the 21st century classroom look like? If someone walked into a 21st century classroom, what would they see? What would be happening? What are the students doing? What is the teacher doing? How are they doing it? What are the roles? What are the permissions? What is the structure of the classroom? What else? Here's a picture of a 19th century classroom. Here's a picture of a 20th century classroom. Maybe this is the picture of a 21st century classroom. I don't know. Think about it as we go through today. The big picture here is quite elaborate. Look at this flow chart of creating an assignment and doing an assignment. Very interconnected, lots of dependencies, very confusing. So don't try to do the big picture all at once. Try to do one part at a time. And that's what I want you to take away today is see the big picture, but focus on one aspect. So what is technology? A lot of people say, I use technology, I love technology, but what really is technology? Well, for most people, it is anything invented after you were born. They forget about the pencil, the pen, the paper. These are great technologies. Remember, a technology is simply a tool. It's like a hammer, and a hammer has never made a better house. And the same thing for technology, it has never increased student learning. Make sure you use the right tool for the right job. And who's not done this? Who's not hit a nail with a screwdriver? So what we want to focus on is not the tools, not the technology. We want to focus on the pedagogy and how we can integrate technology to support pedagogy. Here's an example of how things have never changed. 1801 is the invention of an amazing technology called the blackboard. Teacher says, read the passage written on the board and answer questions 1 to 6. The invention of the photocopier, 1960. Teacher says, I've run off some worksheets for you, read the passage and answer questions 1 to 6. I think she taught me in grade 6. In 1983, the first computers hit the schools. Anybody here used one of these pet computers before? I've used a computer to create a worksheet, read the passage, and answer questions 1 to 6. 2015, interactive whiteboards are ubiquitous. They are everywhere. Everybody's using them. Teacher says, read the passage on the whiteboard and answer questions 1 to 6. And as you see, some things have never changed. How about these instructions instead? Read the passage or the page or the section or the chapter, etc. Summarize and interpret it. Have your summary and interpretation critiqued by 3 other students. Give constructive criticism to 3 other students. Now, how can we do this? How can we have this happen? Well, I think one of the solutions is using technology. Integrating technology and pedagogy. Michael Fullan says that there are 4 criteria for integrating technology and pedagogy. He says that exciting, innovative learning experiences must be steeped in real-life problem solving. Real-life problem solving. It's got to be irresistibly engaging. for both the teacher and the student. Elegantly efficient and easy to use. It's got to be easy. It's got to be simple. It's got to be worth the time and effort. And it's got to be ubiquitous. It's got to be available anywhere, anytime, 24/7, 365. We need to change the subject focus. We have to have a paradigm shift on what are the important things, who's in charge. In the traditional classroom, students are dependent on the teacher. Students learn individually. Teacher directs the learning. It's the teacher's time, the teacher's place, and the teacher's pace of learning. Teacher has ownership of all the learning. In a student-based classroom, the student is an independent learner, has collaborative teamwork, student-directed learning. It happens anytime, anywhere, and at any pace. Student has ownership of the learning. Now, let's not get confused between individually and independently. Individually implies separately, alone. Independently implies without requiring support from others. You want your students to become an independent learner. Now, is this all new? Well, back in 1975, when I was in grade 13, taking chemistry with Mr. Snyder, this is exactly how he taught. This is where I found out first about ownership of learning. Assessment. We're going to change how we assess. We have a paradigm shift on assessment. In the old days, the teacher assesses, that is, assessment of learning. We move along where we actually have peers review, assessment for learning. Lastly, self-assessment, assessment as learning. This is so important. I've had so many students come to me and say, well, I've read the book. I went over my notes, but did they really assess their learning? Assessment. Quizzes and tests are great for assessing. They're great assessing remembering, understanding, and application. Multiple choice quizzes are great because they're objective, they're reusable, and they give immediate feedback. These are all great. But what we want to know is, what about innovation? What about creativity? How can we assess that? Because creation and innovation is a long process with many steps and many trials. It does not happen on a test. You cannot test for creativity with paper and pencil. It's a long, long process. Thinking. Bloom's cognitive domains categories: remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. You've all heard these. What I'm going to say to you now is, these ones here, the first three, remembering, understanding, and applying, don't focus on those. What you want to do is focus on creating. The others will follow. Here, I'll show you. You have to remember before you create. Before you can create a concept, you must be able to evaluate the options. There's so many different ways of doing things, divergently thinking about things, that you have to evaluate what is best to create something new. But before you can evaluate something, you must analyze it. You must say, it has this, it has that, it can do this, it can do that. Before you can analyze it, you have to be able to apply it. Now, I'll get into that in a second. Before you apply, you must understand. And before you understand, you must remember it. So here's an example. Before I can find the area of a rectangle, I have to remember that this is a rectangle and its length times width. Before I can find the area of a circle, I must understand, oh, wait a second, it's a circle, it's not a rectangle. Pi r squared is the area. And then I can apply it. I can't apply the other one. I have to be able to make sure I can apply the right formula. Lastly, before you can apply and determine the area of a whistle, you must see that it's part rectangle and part circle. You have to analyze it. And you can find the area of one part, then the area of the second part, and then finally subtract out the area that overlaps. You have to be able to analyze it. Motivation. There are extrinsic motivators. Teachers and parents push, push, push. There are peer motivations. Membership, belonging, want to be part of a team, a group. Subject matter. Hey, chemistry, programming, I love it. I'll do it just because it's fun. Intrinsic motivation. Now, how do you get them to be intrinsically motivated? You must give them autonomy, mastery, and purpose. Once those are given to the student, they have those, then they will be intrinsically motivated. The product. Substitution. Now, we've all been doing this. Replace the pen with the keyboard, replace a letter with an email, replace a hand drawing with a photograph. Really, there's no change in the task. It's just a substitution of one tool for another tool. And this is great. Then we can go to augmentation. And not only do we replace the keyboard, the pen with the keyboard, but now we allow them to use assistive technology like text-to-speech and speech-to-text and spell checkers and thesauruses. We increase efficiency because of this. Next, modification. We're going to change things up. So before, it was only the student keyboarding themselves. Now, they can share the keyboard, share the editing with other students. Students compile their research collectively. Online forms collect and analyze data. What we have done here is enhanced a task. Redefinition. The story now becomes a picture book. So rather than keyboarding, we now make a picture book. We make a graphic novel, or make a blog, or make a vlog, or even make a movie. The audience changes from the teacher to the world. So students now create things for the classroom down the hall. They create something for the classroom in another country. Mentors can be anywhere, not just the teacher, not just their parents, not just their peers. Mentors can be everywhere. So you can tie in with another school. You can tie in with a university or a college. What we have now is a new task that was not previously possible or imaginable, something brand new. This whole shift of product is called the SMAR model. SAMR, substitution, augmentation, modification, redefinition. Now, don't think you have to go from the pen and the keyboard all the way to a brand new task that was not previously possible or imaginable. No, take it one step at a time. We're going to go from the keyboard to assistive technology. We're going to go from assistive technology to students compile their research together. And lastly, change the audience from the teacher to the world, one step at a time. To help us do this, we're going to use something called the Padagogy Wheel. Not the Pedagogy Wheel, the Padagogy Wheel. And here it is here. And again, the big picture. It's huge. It's really, really overwhelming. But let me just tell you how this works. We start at the core, at the center. We look at the things that students must be able to do. According to the Ministry of Education, they must be able to meet these expectations. Then, based on those core expectations, we want to pick one of Bloom's categories to see if we can assess the students' meeting of the expectation. So do we want to have them remember? Does that meet the expectation? Do we want them to be able to understand, to be able to apply, to be able to analyze, evaluate, or create? You pick one of those Bloom's categories that you want the student to work at. So quite often it's this remember the following. So what you do is you say, I want to remember. And how are they going to do that? Well, they're going to make a list. They're going to listen. They're going to find. They're going to visualize. They're going to tabulate. Whatever. Those are the things they're going to do. Then moving out from remember, we go to an activity. What kind of activity will allow them to do that? Well, they can create a favorites list. They can do a test or a quiz. They can read. They can make a mind map. Now, what kind of a tool will help them do that? Well, the tools that will help them do that will be applications on their pad, on their tablet, on their iPad, whatever you have. And so there's a whole bunch of tools up here, applications. There's Notepad+, there's Google, there's Google Calendar, there's PowerPoint, Scribe, all kinds of different applications that they could use. Now, this is a very short list of applications. You don't have to use Google. You don't have to use Word. You don't have to use these particular ones. If it says use Word, well, that means you can use Google Docs. You can use WordPerfect. You can use a Notepad. Whatever you want, it doesn't really matter. Okay, so use any application or substitute in for any application you want. Support. Now, how do you get support for that? Well, the IT department can help you. They can find those applications. They can put them on your computer. They can get you going. Your peers are already doing this. They can help you. Your students can do it. Teachers don't have to know how to use every application out there. They don't have to know how to use all the technologies. Students can find it out themselves. What you're looking for is a product. That's what you're going to assess. Did they produce the product that you wanted? But also, in terms of support, 95% of everything I've learned in the last 5 years, I've learned on YouTube. Did you know that YouTube is the second biggest search engine? I don't know what the biggest search engine is. I'll have to Google that. Sample searches. Pick a Bloom category. Pick an action verb. Pick an activity. Pick a new app. Okay, so for instance, let's say we want students to be able to critique something. Let's say a news item. Let's say they have to use an application to do it. So you can actually do this search. Search for critique, news, item, application. Also search for activity, app. So I want to podcast with GarageBand. How do I do that? You can do this in YouTube, and though I've never done this before, I know that there are videos out there on YouTube on exactly how to make a podcast and how to use GarageBand to do that podcast. Paradigm shift, delivery. In the traditional learning setting, it's the teacher time, the teacher's place, and the teacher pace. With blended learning, we now move away from teacher-oriented to e-learning and anytime, anywhere, any pace. Now, e-learning is fully online learning. Teacher and student perhaps never see each other. Perhaps students never see any other student either, but because it's always online. Blended is a mix between. So sometimes the student's working independently at home or away from school. Sometimes they're at school. It's a blend between independent and traditional. Learning summary. Traditional learning, students are dependent learners. They learn individually. Teacher directs the learning. Students work at the teacher's time, pace, and place and pace. Teacher has ownership of learning. Teacher assesses assessment of learning. Memorization-based learning, Bloom Level 1. Extrinsic motivators, teacher and parents. The substitution of tools is simply the keyboard replaces the pen. In blended learning, students are independent learners. They work in collaborative teams. Student directs the learning. Students work anytime, anywhere, any pace. Students have ownership of learning. Students assess their own learning assessment as learning. Students create, that means they work at level 6. Intrinsic motivation. Students have autonomy of learning, they work on mastery of learning, and they have a purpose because the learning is about them. We now move to a redefinition of learning. Students don't just make essays, they make movies, podcasts, blogs, graphic novels. Ownership of learning. Students can and will own their own learning if students assess their own learning, students create, students have autonomy and purpose and then master. Teachers and schools redefine learning using the SMAR model. questions. Can you think of 3 issues that will happen by implementing these shifts we've talked about? How do we implement all this? This student-centered, assessment, Bloom, blended delivery, SMAR. Isn't this a lot of work? How much of this must we implement now? Well, let's talk about this thing right here. We showed this earlier on. This is the process required to have a student submit work. And there's 26 separate processes, 26 separate steps. From the top of creating the assignment, where you make a rubric, add a checklist, add an exemplar, put in the supporting documents like notes and texts, add in resources like charts and diagrams, bibliographies. Then you have to, once you've created this assignment, you have to print it off and print off the supporting documents. Then you have to hand out the assignments to all the different students with all the supporting documents. Then you have to make sure that, hey, did every student get it? No, the reason they didn't get it because they were on a field trip or they were absent, they were sick for some reason. So we have to make sure that every student has all this documentation. And if they do get it, that's great. What you have to do now is make sure that over the period of how long it takes to do the assignment, maybe it's a week or 2, that students haven't lost any of those documents. And if they have, got to go back and give them those documents. Now, does the student have a question? So Billy Bob has a question about the assignment, and you talk to Billy Bob. Oh, yes, here's your answer, Billy Bob, and you give the student the answer. Now, if you give it to Billy Bob, that means you have to give it to all the students. But are all the students there? No, you have to keep on repeating this until you get all the students there present to give them this information. What happens if you've made a mistake on one of the documents, either the assignment itself or a supporting document? Maybe there's an error. You got to tell the whole class. Did the whole class get that information? No. Then you have to keep on repeating until the whole class gets it. And if they did all get it, fine. We're all set to go. Is it the due date? Yes. Well, then we're going to collect it all in. But if it's not, you got to go all back to the top again. Make sure that nobody's lost their documentation. Nobody's lost the assignment. Nobody has any questions. Nobody has, and there is no error in the assignment. And repeat and repeat and repeat. Then finally, if it's all good, it's a due date, students submit their work. Now, the problem with that is they forgot it at home. It got lost. Gee, I didn't know it was due today. And you have to wait a day until they submit it in. Once you've collected all the assignments in, after maybe 3 or 4 days of waiting for them to be submitted, you have to mark the assignment. Now, what I do when I get an assignment from students is that I will check it out for completion. If it's not complete, I give my students a second chance to complete a section. So I make sure to say, hey, this section is not very good. Why don't you fix this up so you can show me what you've really learned about this? So I return it to the student, and I have to wait for a day for them to get back to me. Wait. Finally, all the students have submitted all their work. It's all complete, and I have to return the assignments. Now, when I do return the assignments during class time, the problem is somebody's missing. And if a student is absent, I have to wait a day to tell them about the situation, and then wait a day for the next student to tell them a situation. But if I finally tell all the students and get it all done, I'm done. And that is how you give back an assignment or hand out an assignment to students. Lots and lots of work, 26 steps. However, if we do it in a blended way, we still have to start, but we only now have 9 steps. Here it goes. We have the assignment created, just as before. We put the assignment and the documents all into Google Drive. That's it. No printing. Now, is there an error? Could be. You just go back into Google Drive, make the change, and tell students about the change via a comment. And we'll talk about that later on. Now, once that's done, you say, hey, it's the due date. I'm going to mark it. You go to mark it, and you say, hey, you know what? This student needs some mentoring. I'm just going to give them some feedback on a daily basis. I can check the students' work daily, hourly, weekly, whatever I want. Just go in and see how they're doing. And if I see that they're not progressing very well at any time, anywhere, I can just give them some feedback. Once the due date comes, I just give them individualized feedback right inside of Google Suites. Done. 9 steps. No paper, no fuss, very simple. Now there seems to be a lot of different apps that we could use. All kinds of different applications we can use to get this done. In the Pedagogy Wheel, there's all kinds of apps, tons and tons of apps. How do we get to know all of it? Well, here's the great thing is, there is one suite of products that you can do it all with. One-stop shopping. And it's G Suite, Google Suite. And in Google Suite, you can communicate, store, and collaborate. All kinds of tools are available. And what you want to do is focus on one tool. Maybe you want to work with docs. Maybe you want to work with slides. Maybe you want to work with drawings. Entirely up to you. Work on one and then expand to the others. Gmail, of course, is a great way to send information back and forth. But you'll find out that Google Docs has an even better way to communicate and collaborate with students. Some of this afternoon, or some of this we'll find out about Google Classroom, a great tool. Now, G Suite is a utility knife. It doesn't have the best tools. It doesn't have the best word processor, nor the best web page development. It doesn't have the best picture editor, but it has a complete suite of tools. It's easy to use and access. It's available on any device. It's available 24/7. It's very collaborative in nature. It has versioning and tracking. That means there's only one document, and you can go back in time to any version of that document. You can see who wrote what on what day. And it's transparent. Everybody sees what's going on. Let's go back to the Pedagogy Wheel for a second. Very confusing. Don't forget, you start from the core, graduate expectations. Then you move out to the action verbs, activities, and then the applications. How about create? We start from create, we go to the action verb, we go to the activity, we go to the app. Create, publish, podcast, GarageBand, iMovie. Also see Soundtrap, great little piece of software. If you've got time, I suggest you watch this video. We're not going to do it now. You can watch it later on. Maybe this is the 21st century. Have a look at this. What's missing? What do you see that you like? What do you see you don't like? So, what I'd like you to do for me, please, is complete the evaluation form at this website. Complete the contact information form if you have any questions. And don't forget, you can actually view this presentation there with all the links and even watch the video and have a better connection with the Padagogy Wheel. Thank you for your time. Please send me any questions or concerns to david.tallockmiller@gmail.com. Thank you very much.